My name is Eleanor Vance, and on the evening of my 75th birthday, in the heart of the home I designed and built with my own 2 hands, I overheard my daughter-in-law whisper the 5 words that set my world on fire. I hope this is her last one. I was standing in the grand hallway, surrounded by the ghosts of my own memories, and as her words sliced through the cheerful noise of the party, I just smiled and played the part of the frail, happy matriarch. But the very next day I made one single phone call that set the perfect trap, a trap built with the same cold precision I once used to design skyscrapers. This is not a story about being a victim. This is the story of how I took back my life, brick by painful brick. Now, before we get into the chilling details of that night, I want to welcome every single one of you here. If this is your first time on the channel, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. I'm always amazed by where these stories reach, so do me a favor and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It makes me feel a little less alone in all this. Okay, let's get back to the party. The whole affair had been my son Michael's idea, of course. "We have to celebrate you, Mom," he'd insisted weeks ago, his voice oozing a thick, cloying sincerity I had once mistaken for genuine love. 75 years is a monumental achievement. And so, my home was transformed. It glittered under the weight of Tiffany's ostentatious taste. The air, which should have smelled of cake and nostalgia, was heavy with the funereal scent of the white lilies she'd had delivered, bushels of them, arranged in stark, modern vases on every surface. The house was filled with the ghosts of my past, former colleagues from my architectural firm, their faces now lined with the gentle passage of time. Old friends from the neighborhood, the city council members I had battled and befriended. But the house itself was slowly becoming a ghost of what it once was. It was a structure I knew intimately, from the load-bearing walls to the hidden crawl spaces. Yet it was becoming foreign territory. My daughter-in-law, Tiffany, was systematically erasing me from my own life's blueprint. Room by room, she was painting over my carefully chosen colors with 50 shades of soulless beige, replacing my cherished, worn furniture with sharp-angled, uncomfortable pieces that looked like they belonged in a hotel lobby. I excused myself from a conversation with the Dean of Architecture from the University of Colorado, my legs feeling unusually heavy, like they were filled with lead. It was a symptom that had been creeping up on me for months, a profound weakness that had settled deep in my bones ever since my dear sister Carol had passed away 3 years prior. Michael had attributed it to grief, and Dr. Albright, his specialist friend, had readily agreed. I made my way down the long hallway toward the powder room, my hand grazing the cool, textured plaster walls. I designed them to catch the golden hour light of the Colorado sun, to make the whole corridor glow. As I approached the end of the hall, I heard voices drifting from Michael's study. His heavy oak door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light cutting through the dimness. I recognized Tiffany's sharp, breathy tone immediately. She was on the phone, her voice a conspiratorial whisper laced with venom. "I hope this is her last one. Seriously," she said, and I could practically hear the smug smile on her face. "The woman is a walking relic. I've already got the blueprints from a designer to turn her dusty old studio into a walk-in closet to die for." I froze, my hand flying to the wall to steady myself. The blood roared in my ears, a deafening tsunami that drowned out the party noise. A walk-in closet. My studio. The sun-drenched room where I had drafted the buildings that define the Denver skyline, the place my soul felt most at home, was to become a tomb for her ridiculously expensive designer shoes. The sheer breathtaking cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs. But what came next didn't just steal my breath. It shattered my heart into a million irreparable pieces. It was Michael's voice. My son. My only child. The boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose report cards I had celebrated, whose future I had invested my entire life in. His tone wasn't angry or defensive. It was calm, patient, clinical. "Patience, honey," he said, his voice a smooth, chilling poison. "Dr. Albright says her heart is weaker than ever. It's just a matter of time. And once it happens, this house, the accounts, everything becomes officially ours." A soft, celebratory clinking of glasses followed. That small sound was the loudest thing I had ever heard. In that instant, the fog of grief and confusion that had shrouded my mind for the past year burned away, incinerated by the white-hot fire of betrayal. I was an architect. I spent my life calculating structural integrity under immense pressure. I knew exactly what it took to stand firm when the very foundations were designed to crumble beneath you. I pulled my hand from the wall, straightened my spine until it was a steel rod, and pulled my shoulders back. I arranged my face into the pleasant, placid mask I had perfected in decades of male-dominated boardrooms. I returned to my party, a ghost in my own life, seeing everything with horrifying clarity. Later, Michael raised his glass high. "To my mother, Eleanor Vance," he announced, his face a perfect picture of filial devotion. "The strongest woman I know." The room erupted in applause. I smiled and nodded, my eyes meeting his across the room. But I wasn't seeing my son anymore. I was seeing a stranger, a predator. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my very marrow, that this was a war for my survival. They thought I was a fragile old woman, fading away into the beige walls of their ambition. They had no idea they were living in a structure whose every secret, every weakness, and every escape route I had designed myself. They weren't planning my funeral. They were planning their own downfall. The morning after the party was a study in silence. The house, scrubbed clean of guests and festivities by a hired crew, felt cavernous and unnervingly quiet. The cloying scent of Tiffany's lilies still lingered, a constant, sickly sweet reminder of the previous night's grand deception. I sat in my favorite armchair, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, and I waited. My body, which had felt so heavy and weak for so long, was now thrumming with a dangerous, unfamiliar energy. It was the energy of a building under torsion, storing potential force before a catastrophic release. I waited until I heard the purr of Michael's Mercedes in the driveway, and then the sharp click of the front door as he and Tiffany left for their day. A day of spending my money, and I now knew of patiently waiting for my death. The moment they were gone, I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. My first stop was the sunlit kitchen at the back of the house. Maria, my housekeeper and my quiet, steadfast friend of over 30 years, was kneading dough at the large butcher block island, her brow furrowed with the same gentle worry she always wore when she looked at me. She had come to me as a young woman from Mexico, and we had grown older together within these walls. She had held my hand through my husband's long illness, she had celebrated with me when I won the Pritzker Prize, and she had sat with me in silent solidarity in the dark days following my sister Carol's sudden death. She was more family to me than the two vipers who shared my last name. "Maria," I whispered. My voice was hoarse, brittle. She looked up, her hands stilling in the dough, and her dark, kind eyes immediately saw past the mask I had put on. She saw the fracture lines beneath the surface. "Mrs. Vance? Are you all right?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I pulled her into my studio, the very room Tiffany coveted for her shoe collection, and I shut the heavy door, the sound echoing with finality. And then I told her everything. The words tumbled out of me in a torrent, a dam of grief and horror finally breaking. The whispered wish for my death, Michael's cold, clinical confirmation, the mention of Dr. Albright, the inheritance, the closet. When I finished, my body was trembling, and tears I didn't know I had left were streaming down my face. I expected her to be shocked, perhaps even to disbelieve me. It sounded like something from a lurid television movie. Instead, Maria simply nodded, her expression hardening from soft concern into something fierce and protective. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice low and firm, filled with a righteous anger that mirrored my own. "I am not surprised." She walked over to my large bookshelf, the one filled with heavy architectural tomes. She ran her finger along the spines, then pulled down a massive volume on the cathedrals of Europe. From the hollowed-out space behind it, she retrieved a small, worn, spiral-bound notebook. My heart skipped a beat. "I have suspected something was wrong for months," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "So I have been keeping a log." She opened the notebook and I stared at the pages, filled with her neat, precise handwriting. She had documented every single time Michael administered my medication, noting the dates, the times, and her own astute observations. "Look here," she said, pointing to an entry from 2 weeks prior. "The pills they give you in the morning, the ones for your heart, are a different shape and a slightly paler blue than the ones in the prescription bottle Dr. Albright gave you from the pharmacy. I saw them swapping them out once, when they thought I was in the laundry room. I wanted to say something desperately, but I was afraid. Afraid for my job, of course, but mostly afraid for you." I didn't know how to approach you without sounding like a crazy person. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Her loyalty, her quiet, methodical courage, was a balm to my shattered soul. It was the first solid beam in the new structure I would have to build. I hugged her, a real desperate hug that conveyed all the gratitude and terror I couldn't put into words. "You are a better friend than I deserve, Maria," I told her. She then reached into her apron pocket and pressed a small, prepaid burner phone into my hand. "I bought this a while back," she admitted, a faint blush on her cheeks. "Just in case. For an emergency." She had known, on some deep intuitive level, that I was in danger. With Maria standing guard by the studio door, I took a deep, shuddering breath and dialed a number I hadn't called in nearly 20 years. A number I knew by heart, a sequence of digits etched into my memory like the cornerstone of a beloved, long-lost building. It rang twice on the other end of the country before a deep, familiar voice answered, sharp and impatient. "Chun. David," I said, my own voice a fragile, cracking thing. "It's Eleanor. Eleanor Vance." The silence that followed was vast and profound, filled with the weight of unspoken decades and a path not taken. "David Chun." We had been rivals, partners, and almost so very close to being something more back when we were young, ambitious architects trying to reshape the world with steel and glass. I chose my family, my husband, my son. He chose his career, moving to San Francisco and building a global empire. We hadn't spoken a real word to each other since my husband's funeral, where he had stood silently in the back, a ghost from another life. "I need your help," I said, the words feeling heavy and inadequate in the face of our shared history. I paused, gathering my strength, and then I played my hand, the only card I had left that I knew he would value. "And I think it's time we finally talked about the Aspen project." The line was silent for another long moment, and then I heard him take a sharp, audible breath. The Aspen project was our shared dream from our youth, a revolutionary, sustainable urban development concept we had designed together on late nights fueled by coffee and ambition. It was our unfinished symphony. "I'm listening, Eleanor," he said, his voice suddenly sharp with a focus I knew so well. "Tell me everything." And for the first time in 3 long years, I felt the solid ground beneath my feet again. The architect was back at her drafting table. But this time I wasn't designing a building. I was designing a reckoning. 3 days later, I was a ghost in my own city. Maria drove me, huddled in the back of her old, reliable sedan with a scarf over my head, to a small, discreet medical practice in a quiet Boulder neighborhood, an hour's drive from the prying eyes of Denver. The appointment was clandestine, a secret operation booked under Maria's sister's name. David, with his usual quiet efficiency, had arranged it all from San Francisco. The doctor waiting for me was Edward Peterson, my trusted physician for over 2 decades before Michael, with his gentle, insidious persistence, had convinced me to switch to his brilliant cardiologist friend, Dr. Daniel Albright, a man whose smile was as slick as the expensive gel in his hair. Dr. Peterson's face, a kind and familiar map of wrinkles, was etched with deep concern as he led me into his private office. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low rumble, as he took my trembling hands in his warm, steady ones. "Michael called me personally last year. He told me you were in a fragile state after Carol's passing, and that you wanted to consolidate all your care with a heart specialist. I was worried, of course, but he's your son. I never imagined." His voice trailed off, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air. I spent the next 2 hours with him. It wasn't a standard checkup. It was a forensic examination. He conducted a battery of tests, a detailed EKG, extensive blood work that he marked as urgent, and a thorough neurological exam to assess the cognitive fog I had been experiencing. I told him everything, my voice low and urgent, the story spilling out in the sterile, safe quiet of his office. I showed him the small, clear plastic baggie containing the pale blue pills I had been hiding for the past 2 days. He took it from me as if it were a venomous snake. He listened without a single interruption, his expression growing darker and colder with every word I spoke. When the initial lab results came back from the in-house lab, he called me back into his office. He sat across from his large mahogany desk, his hands clasped in front of him, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated fury. "Eleanor," he began, his voice laced with a controlled anger, Your heart is as strong as a bull's for a woman of 75. There is absolutely nothing fundamentally wrong with it. The EKG is perfect. He slid a report across the desk to me. But this blood panel, it's deeply, deeply disturbing. The tremors, the mental fog, the profound weakness you're experiencing, this is not heart disease. This is a classic presentation of chronic anticholinergic toxicity, likely combined with a low-dose benzodiazepine. In plain English, Eleanor, someone is poisoning you. Slowly, methodically, and expertly, to mimic the symptoms of dementia and congestive cardiac failure. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy and undeniable. It was one thing to suspect it, to hear it whispered in a shadowed hallway. It was another thing entirely to have it confirmed by a man of science, to see it in black and white on a lab report. My son was trying to murder me. I nodded slowly, a strange, chilling sense of calm washing over me. The terror was still there. A cold knot in my stomach, but the validation was a foundation. It was the solid ground I needed to build my case upon. I'll need to report this to the authorities and the medical board immediately, Dr. Peterson said, his hand already reaching for the phone on his desk. Albright must be stopped. Not yet, I pleaded, my voice sharp, leaning forward and grabbing his arm. Edward, please. You must give me some time. If they are confronted now, before I have my own protections in place, they'll either accelerate their plan or have me committed. They have spent months meticulously building a narrative that I'm confused, delusional, and paranoid. They will say I'm making it all up. I need time to gather my own, undeniable evidence. To build a cage for them they can't escape. He hesitated, clearly torn between his ethical duty and his long-standing loyalty to me. Finally, he looked me in the eye and saw the steely resolve there. He relented, agreeing to give me 4 weeks and 4 weeks only. Be careful, Eleanor, he warned, his voice grave. You are playing a very dangerous game. The drive back to Denver was a silent one. The mountains a stark, beautiful backdrop to the ugly reality of my life. I had my confirmation. I had my first real piece of evidence. That night I perfected the art of hiding the pills under my tongue. The bitter, chemical taste, a constant metallic reminder of the depth of my son's betrayal. But just as I felt I was beginning to gain some small measure of control, Tiffany struck again. This time with a move that was both insidious and brilliant. 2 days after my secret visit to Dr. Peterson, she greeted me in the morning room with a bright, false smile that didn't reach her eyes. Eleanor, darling, I've been so worried about you lately. Michael and I feel you need more specialized one-on-one care right here at home. So we've taken the liberty of hiring a private nurse to help Maria out. Her name is Brenda, and she's just wonderful. She comes with the most glowing recommendations. A stout woman in her 50s with a relentlessly cheerful demeanor and the coldest, most watchful eyes I had ever seen appeared from the hallway as if on cue. She was wearing crisp white scrubs and a smile that was all teeth. She took my hand in a grip that was surprisingly, unnervingly strong. It will be such a pleasure to look after you, Mrs. Vance, she chirped, her voice a high saccharine sing-song. I knew in an instant. This wasn't a nurse. This was a warden. This was a spy sent to monitor my every move, to document my every supposed failure, and to report everything back to my captors. The war had just escalated. They had placed an enemy soldier inside my own command center. Living with Brenda was an exercise in constant, nerve-shredding vigilance. She was a shadow that hummed cheerful off-key tunes. Her eyes, those cold, calculating little chips of blue, were everywhere. She'd pop into my studio unannounced, a tray with a cup of herbal tea I didn't want in her hands, her gaze sweeping the room, cataloging every detail. She'd take it upon herself to organize my bookshelves, her thick fingers lingering over my papers and sketchbooks. She'd sit knitting in the corner of the living room while I was on the phone, a professional, caring smile plastered on her face, but I knew she was listening to every word. The house, my sanctuary, had become a panopticon, and Brenda was the ever-watchful guard in the central tower. Maria and I had to resort to communicating in clipped, coded sentences in the pantry or through quick, handwritten notes passed like schoolgirls, which we'd then immediately destroy. The pressure was immense, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety that threatened to wear me down. I have to stop here and ask you all. What would you do in my situation? To feel like a prisoner in your own home, watched 24/7 by a spy hired by your own family, your own son. How would you even begin to fight back when every move you make is being documented and used against you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I need to know I'm not crazy for what I did next. Okay, so this is how I decided to handle her. I couldn't get rid of Brenda. Any attempt to dismiss her would be seen as paranoia, further proof of my declining mental state. So, if I couldn't remove the enemy's spy, I would have to turn her into a double agent whether she knew it or not. If she was a conduit of information to Michael and Tiffany, then I would become the master of that information. I would control the narrative. My performance, which had been good before, now had to be Oscar-worthy. The very next morning the curtain went up. While Brenda was taking my blood pressure, her touch unpleasantly firm, I absent-mindedly picked up the business section of the Wall Street Journal from the coffee table. I held it upside down. "Oh, look at this," I mumbled, squinting at the page with theatrical confusion. I should really invest in... Oh, what are those things called? The picture phones. Yes, all of my money. In the picture phones. I let my voice trail off into a confused silence, staring blankly at the inverted text. Brenda just smiled that patronizing smile, her pen flying across the page of her little notebook. Later that week, I had Maria strategically place a catalog for novelty garden gnomes on my desk, right next to my financial portfolio. When Brenda came into the studio to give me my vitamins, I was on the phone, the landline which I knew they sometimes monitored. I was speaking to a pre-recorded weather information line, but I pretended it was my stockbroker. "Yes, hello, is this Mr. Merrill Lynch?" I said loudly and clearly. "I'd like to liquidate the ceramic fund and put it all into the Gnome Collective." "Yes, that's the one. The one with the little fishing pole. It seems like a very stable market." From the corner of my eye, I saw Brenda's back stiffen as she tried to suppress a laugh. She scribbled furiously in her notes. Maria, a brilliant actress in her own right, played her part to perfection. She would sigh dramatically in the kitchen whenever Brenda was within earshot. "Poor Mrs. Vance," she'd say to the gleaming chrome of the dishwasher. "Her mind is just slipping away. Yesterday she tried to pay me with Monopoly money. Said she had just bought Park Place and was feeling generous. It was utterly, profoundly humiliating. Every faked moment of confusion, every staged lapse in memory, was a small death to my pride. A betrayal of the sharp, capable woman I had always been. But it was working. That night, tucked away in my bedroom with the tiny, sophisticated micro-earpiece David's team had sent me, I listened to the fruits of my degrading labor. The device was linked to the tiny listening bugs his security team had planted in the main living areas during a supposed HVAC system upgrade a few weeks prior. I heard Brenda's detailed, gleeful report to Tiffany over the phone. And then she insisted that her favorite painting, the Rothko, was talking to her. Brenda said, trying and failing to stifle her laughter. She said it was telling her to invest in squirrel food. "She's completely detached from reality, Tiffany. It's even worse than you said. She's gone." A few minutes later, I heard Tiffany speaking to Michael in their bedroom. "Did you hear that? She's completely lost it. Brenda's reports are pure gold. This is exactly what we need for the competency hearing. Our lawyer is going to have an absolute field day with this. Getting full control of the estate will be a slam dunk now. No judge would question it. A competency hearing." The words sent a fresh chill down my spine. That was their next move. To have me legally declared insane. A ward of the very son who was systematically poisoning me. They were so busy, so smugly confident as they watched my feigned decline, that they never once thought to look up and see my real ascent. While they were laughing about my supposed senility, I was on a secure encrypted video call with a man who was about to become their worst nightmare. His name was Jack Riley, and he was the best damn private investigator in the state of Colorado. My meetings with Jack Riley were elaborate productions of high-stakes theater. Maria, my loyal co-conspirator, would announce to Brenda that I was going for my weekly physical therapy session, a real appointment I had established as part of my cover, an excuse to get out of the house and a genuine necessity to rebuild the muscle mass the poisoning had stolen from me. Maria would drive me to the sprawling medical building in Cherry Creek, help me inside through the bustling main entrance, and then once we were out of sight of the entrance cameras and Brenda's watchful eyes, we'd slip out a back service door into a waiting, completely unremarkable dark gray sedan. Jack Riley, a man who could blend into any background, would be sitting behind the wheel. He was a man in his late 40s, a former Denver PD homicide detective with a quiet, unassuming demeanor that completely belied a razor-sharp analytical mind. He specialized in complex financial crimes, particularly the dark, tangled world of elder abuse. He never wasted a single word. On our first meeting, I handed him a heavily encrypted thumb drive containing everything I had. Scanned copies of Maria's meticulous notebook, Dr. Peterson's initial findings and his sworn affidavit, and a catalog of high-resolution photos of the pills I'd been collecting. I gave him the names: Michael Vance, my son; Tiffany Vance, his predator wife; and Dr. Daniel Albright, the physician who had forgotten his oath. "They're methodical," Jack said during our third meeting a week later. His voice was a low, gravelly murmur that was a stark contrast to the breathtaking beauty outside his car window. We were parked in a desolate, windy spot on Lookout Mountain, the entirety of Denver a distant, hazy grid below us. They started small, almost cautiously. He slid a thick folder bound with a rubber band across the seat to me. Inside were copies of my own financial statements, flagged with bright yellow sticky notes. I saw a trail of electronic transfers, small at first, a few thousand here, a few thousand there, like a tentative series of exploratory drills. The money was funneled from my primary investment accounts into a newly created shell corporation with a generic name: Vance Holdings. As my symptoms had worsened over the past year, the amounts grew exponentially larger. "How much?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was churning in my gut. "As of this morning, we've traced just over $2 million, he said, his gaze steady on mine. The funds were then wired from Vance Holdings to an untraceable, numbered offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He got sloppy on one of the larger transfers, routed it through a server that I traced back to the guest Wi-Fi at his golf club. I nodded, a strange, cold detachment settling over me. The number was abstract, unreal. The betrayal was the real, tangible theft. "And Dr. Albright?" I asked. Jack pulled out a second, even thicker folder. "He's a special piece of work. This guy isn't just a bad doctor. He's a serial killer hiding in plain sight. He has a distinct pattern. In the last 5 years, 4 of his wealthy, elderly patients have died suddenly and unexpectedly from what was listed as acute cardiac complications. In each and every case, the deceased patient had recently given a close family member, who was coincidentally also Albright's patient, full and complete power of attorney. The death certificates are all pristine. Natural causes. It's a clean, repeatable system. He doesn't kill them directly with a single traceable act. He prescribes a sophisticated cocktail of drugs that creates a perfect storm, symptoms that justify more medication, which in turn causes the body to slowly, systematically break down. He gets kickbacks, cash gifts, and lucrative referrals from the grateful families. He was a murderer for hire, hiding behind a prescription pad and a veneer of medical authority. The architect in me recognized the grim, horrifying design, the terrible efficiency of his repeatable method. "Show me everything you have on Tiffany," I said, my voice hardening. Jack hesitated for a moment, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. "Eleanor, some of this might be particularly difficult to hear." I gave a short, bitter, humorless laugh. "Jack, I have just learned that my son is methodically poisoning me for my inheritance with the help of a licensed serial killer. I assure you my bar for difficult is now astronomically high." He nodded grimly and passed me a third folder. My breath hitched in my throat. Inside were glossy 8x10 photographs. Tiffany, looking radiant and carefree in a cocktail dress, wrapped in the arms of a handsome, silver-haired man who was most certainly not my son. They were in a dimly lit, expensive-looking hotel bar, laughing, their heads close together. But it was what was on the table in front of them that made my blood run cold. They were reviewing architectural blueprints, my blueprints of my house, and a stack of official-looking property valuation documents. "His name is Stephen Kaufman," Jack explained, his voice a low growl. "A high-end real estate broker with a nasty reputation for aggressively flipping properties of the recently deceased. Before Tiffany ever met your son, she was the primary suspect in an elder financial abuse investigation up in Aspen. Her benefactor, a wealthy ailing oil tycoon, signed over his entire estate to her. He died 2 weeks later, before formal charges could be filed. The case was dropped due to lack of a primary witness. Convenient. The final ugly pieces of the puzzle slammed into place, forming a picture of pure, unadulterated predatory evil. My son hadn't just married a greedy, ambitious woman. He had married a professional, a black widow. So they're not just waiting for me to die, I murmured, my eyes fixed on the photograph of them laughing, planning their lucrative future over the blueprints of my life. They're already liquidating the assets. It appears so, Jack said, his voice grim. That evening, back in the gilded cage of my studio, with Brenda humming cheerfully in the kitchen down the hall, I pulled out a fresh sheet of drafting paper. I began to sketch. I wasn't designing a building of steel and glass. I was designing a trap. A structure so perfect, so elegant, and so inescapable, that once they walked into it, the doors would lock behind them, and they would never ever walk out. And I knew the exact bait I was going to use to lure them inside. The discovery of Tiffany's sordid past, and her ongoing affair with the predatory real estate broker was like a bucket of ice water to my face. The timeline, which had once felt like a slow, creeping dread, had suddenly and violently accelerated. They weren't just waiting patiently for my demise anymore. They were actively planning the disbursement of my estate, carving up my life's work before I was even gone. The very next week, during one of our clandestine meetings on Lookout Mountain, Jack delivered even more chilling news that turned the cold dread in my stomach into a frantic, racing panic. "They've made their next move, Eleanor," he said, his face grim as we sat in the quiet bubble of his car, the city sprawling below us like an unconcerned giant. Tiffany had a 2-hour meeting yesterday with a lawyer. A man named Arthur Croft. He's not just any lawyer. He specializes in elder law, but not the side that protects people like you. He's known in legal circles as a shark, a specialist who helps families gain control of assets by proving, or manufacturing proof of, mental incompetence. My heart, which Dr. Peterson had assured me was strong, hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The competency hearing. My elaborate, humiliating charade with Brenda had worked far too well. I had handed them the perfect script, and now they were preparing for the opening night of my public destruction. I had given them the very ammunition they needed to paint me as a doddering, confused old fool, and now they were loading the gun and taking aim. "What does that mean, Jack?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How quickly can they move?" "Faster than we'd like," he admitted, his gaze unflinching. "Croft is known for filing emergency guardianship petitions. He can get a judge to assign a temporary guardian. In this case, there's no doubt it would be Michael, pending a full psychiatric evaluation. He could file it as early as next week. If a judge, even for a moment, grants that temporary order, Michael would have the absolute legal right to manage all your affairs. And I mean all of them, Eleanor. Your finances, your personal life, and most importantly, your medical care." He let the weight of that sink in. He could have you institutionalized. And once you're in a facility, isolated from Maria, from me, from anyone who could help you, they can do whatever they want. They can accelerate the process, with no one left to witness it. The walls of the car felt like they were closing in, the air suddenly thin and hard to breathe. They were building a legal cage around me, and the bars were forged from my own feigned symptoms. My carefully constructed performance, my only shield, was about to become my inescapable prison. Panic, cold and sharp and tasting of metal, pricked at the edges of my hard-won composure. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and forced the architect's mind to take over. I forced myself to see it not as a crisis, but as a design flaw in my own plan. Every problem had a structural solution. I just needed to find it before the whole thing came crashing down on top of me. "We can't let it get to a judge," I said, my voice firmer now, infused with a desperate resolve. "We can't be on the defensive. We have to move faster. David has already connected me with a lawyer. A woman named Catherine Wells. She's supposedly the best in Denver. We need to get ahead of this now." That same afternoon, from the secure confines of David's borrowed office downtown, I had a secure video conference with Catherine Wells. She was a formidable woman in her 60s with piercing blue eyes, a razor-sharp haircut, and a no-nonsense attitude that I immediately respected and admired. I laid out the entire sordid situation, my voice low and steady, presenting the facts as if I were outlining a complex building project. I detailed Jack's findings, Dr. Peterson's medical conclusions, and the imminent terrifying threat of the competency hearing. Catherine listened intently, her face an unreadable mask of professional concentration. When I finished, she was silent for a long, heavy moment, her fingers steepled under her chin. "This is a nasty, vicious piece of work," she said finally, her voice a low, powerful growl. "Arthur Croft is a snake. But he's a predictable snake. His entire strategy relies on the element of surprise, and a completely one-sided, tragic narrative. We are going to take that away from him. We are going to blow up his entire case before he even files it." Her plan was breathtakingly bold and incredibly risky. We wouldn't just defend against their petition. We would launch a preemptive strategic strike. Catherine would file our own motion with the court first, but it wouldn't be the motion they'd ever expect. We would petition to have a neutral third-party financial conservator appointed by the court to oversee my estate, citing undue family influence and potential financial mismanagement as the reason. "It's a strategic masterstroke," Catherine explained, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "We frame you not as a victim, but as a savvy, proactive individual who recognizes a potential conflict of interest and is taking responsible, prudent steps to protect her own assets. It completely torpedoes their narrative that you're incompetent and out of your mind. We'll attach the first round of findings from Jack's investigation as evidence, along with a sworn affidavit from Dr. Peterson questioning the validity and safety of your current medical treatment. It will make any judge in this state pause long and hard before handing complete control of your life over to your son." It was a brilliant, elegant gambit, but it meant showing our hand much sooner than I had originally planned. It meant the Cold War of secrets and whispers was about to turn into a hot, public, and very ugly battle. As I disconnected the call, my mind racing, Maria came into the room where I was working, her face pale with fear. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice trembling slightly, holding out her phone. "It's about Brenda. I overheard her on the phone in the hallway. She was talking to a pharmacy, confirming a new prescription delivery from Dr. Albright. She said it was a stronger, fast-acting version of your heart medication." My blood ran cold. They weren't waiting for the legal process. They were tired of the game. They were moving to end it once and for all. The race wasn't just against the courts anymore. It was a race for my life. The news of a new, stronger, fast-acting prescription was the final deafening alarm bell. The game had changed. They were done playing the long game of slow, methodical poisoning. My carefully constructed ruse, my performance of a dying woman, had bought me time, but that time was now up. My act had made them impatient. It had made them reckless. I knew in my bones that I couldn't spend another week in that house under their direct control, swallowing placebos while they plotted to put the real fatal dose in my hand. We needed undeniable proof of their intentions, not just their actions. We needed to hear the words from their own mouths. We needed to see and hear everything. David, ever the strategist, had been preparing for this exact contingency. The HVAC system upgrade, a few weeks prior, had been a cover for his elite security team to run the necessary wiring through the walls and ceilings. A skeleton crew of technology waiting for its moment. They hadn't installed the final hardware, the cameras and microphones themselves, deeming it too risky with the ever-present, ever-watchful Brenda in the house. But now the risk of not doing it was infinitely greater. Our opportunity, a brief and dangerous window, came 2 days later. Michael and Tiffany, flush with overconfidence from Brenda's daily reports of my escalating dementia, announced they were going to a weekend-long charity gala in Aspen. "Brenda will take absolutely wonderful care of you, Mom," Michael said, patting my hand with that cloying, false concern that now made my skin crawl. "You just rest." The moment their sleek Mercedes pulled out of the long tree-lined driveway, our operation began. The next few hours felt like a scene straight out of a spy movie, orchestrated with military precision. David's two-man tech team, dressed in believable electrician uniforms, arrived within the hour. Maria, bless her heart, deserved an Oscar for her performance as the flustered, slightly overwhelmed housekeeper. She directed them with a sigh to the faulty wiring in the main rooms, complaining about the flickering lights. While one of them made a show of checking the main breaker box, the other, guided by me, went to work. As the original architect, I knew this house better than I knew my own reflection. I knew every hidden cavity, every forgotten conduit, every perfect unseen sight line. A tiny pinhole camera, no bigger than the head of a pin, was expertly concealed in the intricate wrought iron metalwork of a light fixture I had designed 30 years ago in the living room, giving a perfect panoramic view of the sofa and fireplace area where Michael so often had me sign documents. Another was hidden in the faux spine of a heavy, leather-bound copy of Vitruvius de Architectura, on the shelf in my studio, aimed directly at my main desk. The most crucial one, a marvel of miniaturization, went into the smoke detector on the ceiling of their master bedroom. Tiny, powerful microphones, seamlessly integrated into the existing long-defunct home intercom system grills, were activated in the kitchen, the study, and their bedroom. The team worked with a silent, professional efficiency that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Within 3 hours they were gone, leaving not so much as a speck of dust behind. The house was exactly as it had been, yet it was completely transformed. It was now my fortress, and its walls had finally been given eyes and ears. That night, Maria and I sat in my room, huddled together in the dark, watching the live feeds on a specially encrypted tablet David had provided. It felt like a profound violation, listening to the private, mundane sounds of my own home, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of a floorboard. But that feeling was quickly eclipsed by a cold, righteous anger. This was not a violation. This was self-preservation. This was reconnaissance behind enemy lines. The wait for their return was agonizing. When Michael and Tiffany finally came back on Sunday evening, they were buzzing with the self-satisfied excitement of their weekend of networking and social climbing. They believed they were on the absolute verge of victory. That night, tucked away in my bed, feigning sleep, I put the micro earpiece in my ear and I got exactly what I needed. I watched the grainy black and white feed from the smoke detector in their bedroom. Tiffany was scrolling through her phone, a smug, triumphant smile on her face. "Croft says he can file the petition on Wednesday," she said, her voice crisp with excitement. "He thinks Judge Albright, no relation, can you believe the sheer luck of that? Will be incredibly sympathetic to our case. He says by this time next week we'll have full legal control." "Good," Michael said, his voice tense as he unbuttoned his shirt. "Because Dr. Albright is getting nervous. The new prescription is on its way. That should speed things up considerably, but he wants this legal cover in place. The Westridge partnership deal is in its final stages. It needs a massive capital injection that I simply can't access until we have the entire estate secured." Tiffany put down her phone and looked at him, a flicker of something, perhaps the last vestige of a conscience, in her eyes. What if she fights it? What if she has a moment of clarity in front of the judge? And then my son, my only child, said the words that would seal his own fate, words that would echo in my mind forever. "She won't," he said with chilling certainty. "By the time she gets in front of any judge, she won't be able to string a coherent sentence together. Dr. Albright assured me. The new dosage is designed to be definitive." Definitive. A clean, clinical, horrifying word for murder. My hand was perfectly steady as I pressed the button to save the recording. My heart didn't race. It turned into a solid block of ice. I had it. I had the final, undeniable proof. The trap was now wired, armed, and ready. Now all I had to do was choose the perfect moment to spring it. And as luck, or perhaps fate, would have it, they were about to hand me the opportunity on a silver platter. The morning after I captured their chilling conversation on tape, the atmosphere in the house was thick with a strange, predatory anticipation. It was a suffocating quiet, the kind of stillness that precedes a violent storm. Michael, in a rare act of domesticity, brought me my breakfast tray himself. His face was arranged in its usual mask of gentle concern, but I could now see the tension around his eyes, the impatience in the set of his jaw. Alongside the usual oatmeal and fruit was the small, white porcelain cup of pills, which now included a new, slightly larger, pale blue tablet. It stood out amongst the others like a single deadly viper in a nest of harmless garden snakes. "Dr. Albright added a new vitamin supplement, Mom," he said, his voice as smooth and placid as a frozen lake. "He says it's for your circulation, to help with the cold in your hands." I looked at the pill, my would-be executioner, and then I looked up at my son's concerned face. The performance was flawless. He was a natural. I wondered, with a chilling detachment, if he'd ever been sincere about anything in his life. I nodded weakly, fumbling to pick up the pills with a hand I made tremble. I placed them in my mouth and took a long sip of water, carefully tucking the deadly new cocktail into the familiar pocket under my tongue as I swallowed theatrically. He watched my throat, a flicker of something: satisfaction? Relief? In his eyes. He patted my shoulder and left the room. The moment he was gone, I spat the bitter, dissolving pills into a tissue and added them to the grim, growing collection in my hollowed-out copy of The Fountainhead. Later that day, Tiffany glided into my studio, radiating a warmth that was so completely artificial it was almost dazzling. She was wearing a new dress, a vibrant floral number that seemed to mock the sterile tension in the air. "Eleanor, darling," she began, perching on the edge of my drafting table. "Michael and I were thinking. Next month is the 30th anniversary of your first big commission, the extension on the Denver Art Museum. It's such an incredible milestone. We think it deserves a proper grand celebration." I feigned a look of confused surprise, letting my eyes go distant for a moment. "Oh my," I said, my voice thin and reedy. "Has it been that long? I'd forgotten all about that." "Well, we haven't," she said, her smile beaming as she took my hand in her cold one. "We want to host a very special dinner in your honor, a tribute to your incredible legacy. And we've found the perfect place. The Mile High Club. Michael just secured a corporate membership, and it's the most exclusive spot in the city. It's the perfect place to celebrate you." It was perfect. Almost laughably, poetically perfect. They were, with their own arrogant hands, creating the very stage I needed for their public execution. A grand private dining room filled to the brim with Denver's elite, the architects who had once been my peers, the developers who feared my critiques, the city officials whose respect Michael so desperately craved. They would all be the audience for my final act. They weren't planning a celebration of my legacy. They were planning its funeral. A final public viewing of the frail, confused, but once great Eleanor Vance before she was quietly tucked away from public life forever. This wasn't just a dinner. It was their victory lap. "Why, Tiffany," I said, allowing my voice to quaver with just the right amount of pathetic gratitude. That would be lovely, dear. How very, very thoughtful of you to remember." Her smile widened, the triumphant glint in her eyes barely concealed. She thought she had me. She thought this was her final kind gesture before closing the lid on my coffin. "Wonderful," she chirped. "We'll handle everything. Every little detail. You just rest and save your strength for the big night." As she turned to leave, my eyes fell on her wrist. She was wearing my late mother's vintage Cartier watch, the one that was supposed to be passed down to my granddaughter, if I'd ever had one. The one she had borrowed from my jewelry box months ago and never returned. The vultures were no longer circling. They were picking at the corpse. After she left, a cold, hard resolve settled over me. I sent a coded text from my burner phone to David, Catherine, and Jack. The event is set. May 15th. The Mile High Club. It's time to draft the final plans for the demolition. The next few weeks were a blur of intense, clandestine activity. While I played the part of the fading matriarch at home, shuffling my feet and pretending to misplace my reading glasses, my team was working furiously behind the scenes. Jack used his old police contacts to get a full, detailed guest list for the dinner. Catherine prepared the legal documents, including the devastating motion to freeze all my assets, citing the irrefutable evidence from the surveillance recordings. David, meanwhile, was finalizing a blockbuster deal of his own, a secret weapon I was saving for the grand finale. He had revived the Aspen Project, pitching our revolutionary urban design concept to a major, socially conscious development corporation, the Carrington Group. They were interested. Very, very interested. They believed they were negotiating with my proxy, completely unaware of my declining health and the drama unfolding within my own home. My role was the most difficult. I had to maintain the illusion of utter frailty while secretly, desperately rebuilding my strength. I took the real, life-saving medications Dr. Peterson had prescribed, which Maria smuggled to me hidden inside a bottle of vitamin C gummies. I did my physical therapy exercises in the dead of night, my muscles burning as I pushed myself to regain what had been stolen from me. Every day I felt a little clearer, a little stronger. But in front of Michael, Tiffany, and Brenda, I let my hands tremble. I pretended to forget names. I stared blankly at the television. It was the performance of a lifetime. And I knew with absolute certainty that the curtain would rise on May 15th, and there would be no encores. The first week of May arrived, and it brought with it the crisp, clean, hopeful air of a Colorado spring. The aspens in the mountains were beginning to show their first tender green leaves. But inside my house the atmosphere was stale and suffocating, thick with unspoken plans and predatory patience. The date of the dinner, May 15th, was circled in red on the kitchen calendar by Tiffany's hand. It felt less like a party and more like a date with a firing squad. My team was ready. The legal documents were drafted and notarized, the evidence was cataloged and triple-backed up, and the Carrington Group was preparing a formal 9-figure offer for the Aspen project. The only variable left, the only part of the structure that was still under construction, was me. For months I had been an architect of deception, painstakingly building a facade of weakness, a crumbling ruin of a woman. Now, in these final days I had to design my own reconstruction. The woman who walked into the Mile High Club on May 15th could not be the frail, confused, beige-clad Eleanor Vance they had so carefully and cruelly curated for the world. She had to be a phoenix rising from the ashes of their treachery. My transformation took place in the sterile, anonymous luxury of David's downtown penthouse, a glass and steel fortress high above the city, which he had offered as a secure headquarters. Maria would drive me there twice a week under the guise of extra physical therapy sessions. A story Brenda swallowed without question. The first order of business was my appearance. For months I had allowed my silver hair to grow out, wearing it in the soft, grandmotherly bun that Tiffany always complimented with a sickeningly sweet tone. "Oh, Eleanor, it makes you look so serene," she'd say. I knew what she really meant was old and harmless. David had arranged for one of the city's top stylists to meet me at his penthouse. "Chop it all off," I told her, my voice firm. I pointed to a picture in a fashion magazine of a woman my age, an actress with a sleek, sophisticated, razor-sharp silver bob. An hour later, I looked at my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The woman staring back at me was not a victim. She had authority in her eyes, a fire they had tried and failed to extinguish. The soft, blurry lines of the manipulated woman had been replaced by the sharp, clean angles of a survivor. Next was the wardrobe. My closet at home had slowly, insidiously filled with the beige, lavender, and pale pink cashmere sets that Tiffany deemed appropriate for a woman of my age and condition. They were the colors of surrender, of fading away. "I am not attending a funeral," I told David as we looked through options from a high-end personal shopper he had hired. "Even if, in many ways, that's exactly what it is. It will be the funeral of the passive, quiet woman I allowed myself to become." We settled on a dress. It was a stunning architectural gown in a deep, defiant, unapologetic crimson. Its lines were clean and severe, a sheath of structured silk that emphasized strength rather than fragility. It was a declaration of war in textile form. The hardest part, surprisingly, was learning to walk again. Not physically but mentally. I had spent months deliberately shuffling my feet, letting my shoulders slump, feigning a tremor in my every step. I had trained my body to be weak. Now I had to unlearn it. In the privacy of David's sprawling, sun-drenched living room, with the city of Denver as my witness, I practiced walking in a pair of moderate 2-inch heels. At first, my body remembered the act of being weak. I faltered, my balance unsteady. But with each determined step, I focused on the woman I used to be. The woman who could stride onto a construction site or into a hostile boardroom and command the entire room with her presence alone. I walked for hours back and forth across the polished hardwood floors, until my steps were once again measured, confident, and powerful. The day before the dinner, I had my final strategy session. I met with Catherine Wells, my brilliant lawyer, and Sarah Jenkins, the sharp, empathetic prosecutor from the district attorney's office whom Catherine had brought onto the case. Sarah, it turned out, had a personal connection. "My mother was an intern at your firm back in the 80s, she told me with a small smile. "She said you were the toughest, most brilliant, and most inspiring person she ever met." We sat in her quiet, book-lined office as she reviewed the final, damning evidence file, Jack's meticulous financial reports, the lab analysis of the pale blue pills, and the chilling verbatim transcripts from the bedroom surveillance recordings. "This is an incredibly powerful case, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice serious and respectful. "But be prepared. Their lawyers will be brutal. They will attack your credibility. They will use your own magnificent performance against you to paint you as manipulative and unreliable. Let them try, I said, my voice as even and steady as a poured concrete foundation. A building's true strength isn't tested on a calm, sunny day. It's tested in a hurricane. I am ready for the storm. We finalized the plan for the evening. Plainclothes officers would be discreetly positioned at the exits. No dramatic arrests would be made that night. The goal was a quiet, controlled, and public implosion. That night, back in my gilded cage, Tiffany laid out one of her recommended beige cashmere ensembles for me on the bed. "You'll look so lovely and comfortable in this, Eleanor," she cooed, her eyes already distant, likely picturing her new closet. I just smiled. She had absolutely no idea. The woman she was dressing was already a ghost. The real Eleanor Vance was waiting in the wings, dressed in crimson and ready for war. The evening of May 15th arrived with a breathtakingly beautiful Colorado sunset, the sky painted in fiery strokes of orange and purple. Inside my house, however, the air was cold and thick with a palpable tension. The final act was about to begin. At home, Brenda fussed over me with an irritating professional solicitude, helping me into the bland beige cashmere outfit Tiffany had chosen for my public debut as a feeble-minded relic. I played my part to the hilt, my hands trembling with practiced weakness as I fumbled with a simple pearl earring. "Oh, let me help you with that, dear," Brenda said, her voice dripping with the condescension she reserved for children and imbeciles. Michael and Tiffany were waiting for me at the bottom of the grand staircase, looking every bit the part of the perfect, caring, affluent family. Michael wore a new, impeccably tailored tuxedo, and Tiffany was glittering in a sheath of silver sequins and a diamond necklace that I recognized with a jolt. It was mine, a gift from my late husband on our 25th anniversary. It had been taken from my personal safe. The audacity of it, the sheer ghoulish confidence was staggering. "Now, Mom, remember what we talked about," Michael said, his hand on my shoulder, his touch feeling like a brand. "Don't overdo it tonight. Just a brief appearance, a few smiles, and then Brenda will take you home. We don't want you to get too tired." I nodded meekly, my eyes downcast. "Whatever you think is best, dear." They left in their sleek black Mercedes, a chariot bound for their own coronation, leaving me in the capable, watchful care of my jailer, Brenda. They had given her strict instructions to have me brought to the club in exactly 1 hour. The moment the sound of their engine faded down the long driveway, our own meticulously planned operation kicked into high gear. "It's time, Maria," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. Maria, who had been waiting in the kitchen, nodded grimly. We quickly packed a small overnight bag I had prepared earlier. Brenda, who had been tidying up the living room, turned and looked at us, her cheerful mask finally slipping to reveal a deep confusion. "Mrs. Vance, what are you doing? You're supposed to be resting." Her voice trailed off as the headlights of a car swept across the front windows. But it wasn't the anonymous town car Michael had ordered to transport me. It was David's deep blue Bentley, silent and powerful as a shark. Jack Riley, looking sharp in a dark suit, stepped out of the driver's side. Brenda's jaw dropped as Jack approached the door and flashed a small leather wallet containing his private investigator's license. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority, "I'm a private investigator working for Mrs. Vance. Your services here are no longer required. You can either leave peacefully right now, or we can discuss your role in the conspiracy to defraud and endanger Mrs. Vance with the Denver Police Department. Your choice." Brenda turned a pasty, sickly white. She didn't say a word. She grabbed her purse from the hall table and practically scurried out the back door into the night. The drive with Jack to David's penthouse was swift and silent. There, my transformation was completed. The beige cashmere was discarded like a snake shedding its skin. Maria helped me into the crimson dress. The sleek haircut was touched up, a bold, defiant red lipstick was applied, and my posture straightened. Maria fastened my mother's heirloom pearls around my neck, the ones Tiffany had foolishly thought were already hers. "They won't know what hit them, Mrs. Vance," she whispered, her eyes shining with fierce, protective pride. We timed our entrance to the second. David and I arrived at the Mile High Club after all the other guests were seated and served their first course. We could feel the buzz of nervous energy even from the lobby. Michael, we knew, would be getting visibly anxious, spinning a tale for his guests about his mother's delicate condition, and her unfortunate but expected late arrival. We gave our names to the maitre d'. He spoke quietly into his microphone, and his voice, amplified by the club's sound system, boomed with polite authority into the main dining room. Ladies and gentlemen, arriving now, Mr. David Chan and Mrs. Eleanor Vance. We walked in. The room, which had been filled with the low, pleasant hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware, fell completely, utterly silent. Every single head in the room turned towards the entrance. I watched, with a grim and profound satisfaction, as a wave of expressions washed over the crowd. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally sheer unadulterated shock. I walked with my head held high, my steps measured and strong, the crimson dress flowing around me like a banner of war. David, a silent, powerful and handsome presence, was by my side. I drank in the sight of their faces, a gallery of astonishment. My eyes found my son. Michael looked as though he had seen a ghost. And in a way he had. He was seeing the ghost of the powerful, formidable woman he had tried so hard to bury. He stood frozen, his wine glass halfway to his lips, his mouth slightly agape. Tiffany's perfectly made-up face was a mask of pure horror, her eyes darting frantically between me and the distinguished, wealthy man at my side, the frantic calculations almost visible behind her panicked gaze. "Mother!" Michael finally sputtered, the word catching in his throat, a strangled, pathetic sound. I gave them both a cool, serene smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "Michael!" "Tiffany!" I nodded, my voice ringing with a clarity and strength no one in that room had heard from me in years. "Thank you for arranging this lovely event. You really shouldn't have." Tiffany, ever the survivor, found her voice first. You're looking well," she stammered, her voice an octave too high. I let my smile widen just a fraction, my eyes locking with hers, a silent promise of the devastation to come. "It's truly amazing what proper medication and getting rid of toxic parasitic influences can do for one's health," I replied, my voice carrying clearly and easily across the suddenly silent room. The first shot had been fired. The war had begun. Can you just picture their faces? That absolute pin-drop silence in a room full of Denver's most powerful people. The shock, the panic. After months of being a silent pawn in their disgusting game, the queen was finally back on the board, and she was ready to flip the whole table. "I want to thank you all so much for sticking with me on this incredible and frankly terrifying journey. The response in the comments has been a source of immense strength for me. If you've been watching this far, and you're on the edge of your seat like I was that night, do me a favor and comment with the number 1 down below, just so I know you're still with me. Because the checkmate is coming, and trust me, it's going to be spectacular." The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and I was the conductor of a symphony of discomfort. I was seated at the head table, a queen holding court, placed directly between a bewildered, silent Michael and a stone-faced, visibly panicked Tiffany. David sat on my other side, a silent, immovable pillar of strength and a clear symbol of my renewed power. The initial deafening shock in the room slowly gave way to a confused, excited buzz of whispers. The story was changing in real time right before their eyes. The narrative they had come to witness, a sad farewell to a fading icon, was being aggressively rewritten. People kept coming up to our table, drawn like moths to a flame. "Eleanor, you look absolutely magnificent." An old colleague, a rival architect named Bill, exclaimed, his eyes wide with genuine surprise. "My God, we'd heard you were unwell." "Just a small but serious disagreement with my former medical team," I'd reply with a serene, cryptic smile, letting my gaze drift pointedly to Michael for a fraction of a second. "I'm feeling much better now that I've taken back control of my own healthcare decisions." With every carefully chosen comment, with every display of lucidity, I could see my son shrinking in his chair, the color draining from his face. Tiffany, desperate to control the spiraling narrative, tried to recover, plastering a brilliant, false smile on her face. "Isn't it just wonderful?" she chirped to anyone who would listen. "We were so terribly worried, but she's had a truly miraculous turnaround. It's the answer to our prayers." Her voice was a little too high, her laughter a little too brittle. They were trapped in a prison of their own making. They couldn't challenge my apparent recovery without looking like monsters who were disappointed that I wasn't, in fact, dying. They had to sit there, smiling and nodding, and pretend that this triumphant return to health was the outcome they had always wanted. Throughout the main course, I held court. I engaged in lively, detailed conversations about new zoning laws, sustainable building materials, and the future of urban planning. I was sharp, I was witty, I was informed, and I was completely undeniably lucid. With every coherent sentence, with every shared laugh, I was systematically dismantling the cruel, false narrative of my incompetence in front of their most important colleagues, investors, and future business partners. Finally, the dessert plates were cleared away. Michael, looking pale, drawn, and utterly desperate to regain some semblance of control, stood up and clinked his wine glass for attention. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice straining to find its usual confident, commanding tone. "Thank you all again for coming tonight to honor a true Denver icon, my mother. On that note, and with her incredible recovery in mind, I have some personal news I'm thrilled to share. As of next month, Westridge Development has made me a full partner." A smattering of polite, slightly confused applause rippled through the room. This was supposed to be his moment, his grand coronation. He sat down, looking visibly relieved. He thought the danger had passed. He thought he had weathered the storm. He was so wrong. I caught David's eye across the table. He gave me the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. I stood up slowly, the crimson dress falling in a perfect architectural line. The room, which had just started to buzz again, fell completely silent. All eyes were on me. "Congratulations on your promotion, Michael," I said, my voice clear and steady, easily carrying to every corner of the room. "That is truly wonderful news. It seems tonight is a night for big, life-changing announcements. Because as it happens, I have a few of my own." On cue, as prearranged with the maitre d', 3 elegantly dressed individuals from the Carrington Group, led by their distinguished CEO, Howard Carrington, entered the dining room and stood by the back wall, their presence radiating power and importance. "First," I announced, my gaze sweeping the room, "I am absolutely thrilled to officially announce my return to the world of architecture with the immediate launch of the Aspen project." Audible gasps rippled through the audience of architects and developers. It is a $120 million urban renewal project, in a new and exciting partnership with the esteemed Carrington Group, that will transform the old rail yards into a model of sustainable, community-focused living. As I spoke, the club's waiters, who had been briefed and handsomely tipped, began placing elegant, professionally bound portfolios detailing the project at every single place setting. I watched Michael's face turn ashen. That was the seed capital he had been trying to secure for his own Westridge partnership deal. "But that is not all," I continued, letting the drama build, enjoying the moment. My voice didn't waver. "I have always believed that our true purpose is to build for the future, which is why I am equally proud to announce the formal establishment of the Vance Foundation for Aspiring Architects." I paused, turning my gaze directly to Tiffany, whose champagne glass was frozen halfway to her painted lips. "To ensure its permanent legacy, I have endowed the foundation with its first major asset. As of last month, my home on Crestmore Park is no longer my private residence. It is now, legally and irrevocably, the property of the foundation, to be preserved in perpetuity as an educational and creative center for young architects." Tiffany made a small, choked, gagging sound. Her dream of a walk-in closet, and the $10 million property that came with it, had just evaporated into thin air. I let the weight of that news settle into the shocked silence of the room for 1, 2, 3 beats. Then I delivered the final fatal blow. "And finally," I said, my voice now cold as steel, as I nodded towards the main entrance, "it appears that some serious legal matters regarding the past and present mismanagement of my personal estate require immediate attention." As if summoned, Sarah Jenkins, the prosecutor, looking formidable and professional in a dark pantsuit, stepped into the room, flanked by 2 of her associates. She held a thick, leather portfolio. She walked with a calm, unhurried purpose directly to our table, her eyes fixed on my son. Checkmate. The fallout was immediate, devastating, and surgically precise. The quiet, professional manner of Sarah Jenkins' arrival was far more terrifying than a chaotic raid of uniformed officers ever could have been. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She simply exuded an aura of calm, unshakable authority that sucked all the remaining air out of the room. She opened her leather portfolio and slid a thick, bound document across the polished table, stopping it directly in front of Michael's dessert plate. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice audible only to our stunned table but her presence commanding the rapt attention of the entire room. "This is a formal notice of a pending criminal investigation into financial fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and illegal administration of a controlled substance. We have also, as of an hour ago, executed a court order to freeze all personal and corporate assets connected to you and your wife, pending the outcome of this investigation." Michael stared down at the paper as if it were a live scorpion. His face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of gray. He looked up, his eyes wild with disbelief and a dawning animalistic panic. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, his voice cracking and rising in pitch. "This is a complete misunderstanding. My mother is confused. She's been unwell for months, just ask her doctor." Sarah didn't even blink. "Dr. Albright is, as we speak, having a detailed conversation with investigators from the State Medical Board and the DEA, she replied coolly, without missing a beat. "We believe his full and honest cooperation could be very beneficial to him in the long run." The color drained completely from Michael's face. He shot a desperate, pleading look across the table at Tiffany, his last hope, his partner in crime. But Tiffany, ever the pragmatist, was already in full self-preservation mode. She was a rat, and the ship was not just sinking, it was already on the ocean floor. She physically recoiled from him, pulling her chair back slightly. "I had absolutely nothing to do with her medical decisions," she said quickly, her voice sharp and brittle with panic. "Michael handled all of that. All of it. I was never involved in those private conversations." Sarah simply raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow and slid a second document, a highlighted transcript, across the table to her. "In that case, Ms. Vance, perhaps you can clarify this conversation you had with your husband on the evening of May 5th, which we have on tape. The one where you discussed the definitive nature of the new medication, and the most effective timeline for the competency hearing." Tiffany's jaw snapped shut with an audible click. She looked down at the highlighted words on the page, her own treacherous statements staring back at her. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. She was caught. Utterly and completely caught. The remaining guests, who had been a captive and horrified audience to this real-life family tragedy, began to discreetly make their exits, murmuring feeble excuses about babysitters and early morning meetings. They moved with the quiet, awkward urgency of people fleeing the scene of a catastrophic disaster. The Carrington Group executives, however, remained firmly seated by my side, a clear and public statement of their allegiance, and where the real power now resided. Howard Carrington even placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Michael, his desperation curdling into a pathetic last-ditch attempt at control, turned his wild eyes to me. His voice adopted that gentle, condescending tone he had used to lull me into a state of submission for months. "Mother, you're clearly unwell. You're being manipulated by these people. Let's just go home, and we can discuss all of this in the morning when you've had some proper rest." I met his gaze directly, and the time for masks, for pretense, for playing the part of the frail victim was over. "I have never been clearer in my entire life, Michael," I said, my voice as cold and hard as granite. "It took me 3 long months to recover from the poison that you have been systematically feeding me for the last year. But I can assure you, I am fully capable of making my own decisions now." "Poison? That's an absurd, a delusional accusation," he shot back. But his panicked eyes darted nervously towards the grand double doors of the dining room, where he had finally spotted the 2 calm, watchful plainclothes officers Sarah had stationed there. "We have the complete lab analysis of the pills you provided, Michael," Sarah interjected smoothly, her voice cutting through his bluster. "And we have a full, sworn, and notarized statement from Maria Rodriguez about the regular pill substitutions she personally witnessed over a period of several months." At the mention of Maria's name, a flash of pure, unadulterated hatred crossed Michael's face. That interfering, meddling. "Careful." I cut him off, my voice dangerously low, a final warning. "Your position is precarious enough as it is. I would not add witness intimidation to the growing list of felony charges you're facing." Tiffany, seeing the complete and utter collapse of their entire world, made a different final calculation. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly and obscenely on the marble floor. I think I need to use the restroom," she murmured, fumbling for her ridiculously expensive designer purse. "Of course," Sarah said with a thin, cruel smile. "My colleague would be more than happy to accompany you." She nodded to a calm, professional female detective standing near the door, who stepped forward with a professional, unwavering smile and fell into step right behind Tiffany as she made her walk of shame. The orchestration was perfect. No dramatic arrests. No public handcuffing. Just the quiet, relentless, and inescapable pressure of consequences, closing in on them from all sides. As his new partners from Westridge melted away into the crowd without so much as a backward glance, my son finally truly understood. He was utterly and completely alone, a king deposed in his own throne room. In the cavernous, near-empty dining room of the Mile High Club, the weight of what had just transpired settled upon us like a physical shroud. The air, which had been filled with celebratory chatter just an hour ago, was now thick and heavy with the ghosts of ruined lives. The beautiful illusion Michael and Tiffany had so carefully constructed had not just been cracked, it had been pulverized into dust. Michael stood there, a solitary, pathetic figure amidst the wreckage of his own ambition, his new tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap, ill-fitting costume. The social currency he valued above all else, reputation, connections, the appearance of success, had just been irrevocably declared bankrupt in the most public way imaginable. "You've destroyed my entire career," he said, his voice no longer panicked, but a low, venomous hiss. The shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, ugly, bottomless anger. "No, Michael," I replied, my own voice surprisingly calm, devoid of the righteous fury that had been churning inside me for months. In its place was just a vast, cold emptiness. "You destroyed it. You, Tiffany, and Dr. Albright. The moment you collectively decided that my life was an acceptable price to pay for your impatience and your ambition, you lit the fuse on this bomb yourself. I just chose the time and place of the detonation." For the first time all night, he didn't bother with a denial. The energy for lies, for performance was gone. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a resentment so profound, so deeply rooted it was startling. It was the resentment of a lifetime. "You never understood," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You never ever understood what it was like to be your son, to always be in your shadow, to never ever measure up to the great Eleanor Vance. Dad understood. He felt it too. The mention of my late husband, a good but complicated man who had indeed struggled to live alongside my professional success, was a deliberate, final twist of the knife. It was his last desperate attempt to wound me, to reframe his monstrous actions as a tragic consequence of my own failings. Once it would have. Years ago it would have sent a sharp, painful shard of guilt straight to my heart. But now, in the cold, clear light of his betrayal, I saw it for exactly what it was. Another manipulation. The last pathetic excuse of a weak, entitled man. And I felt nothing but a profound, sorrowful pity for the small person he had become. The legal process moved with the methodical, grinding precision of a glacier. Tiffany, true to her predatory nature, immediately turned on her co-conspirators to save herself. She cut a deal with the DA's office, agreeing to testify against both Michael and Dr. Albright in exchange for a significantly reduced sentence. Her detailed, self-serving testimony, combined with our mountain of irrefutable surveillance evidence and Maria's courageous statement, created an ironclad case that no high-priced lawyer could dismantle. A few weeks after that fateful dinner, as I was staying in the quiet sanctuary of David's guest suite, I was informed by the doorman that I had an unexpected and unwelcome visitor. It was Michael. I agreed to meet him in the sterile, impersonal lobby. He looked terrible. He was unshaven. His eyes were bloodshot and sunken, and he had lost a shocking amount of weight. His expensive suit was rumpled, and his former confidence had been completely replaced by a hollowed-out, twitchy desperation. "Mother," he said, his voice raspy, as he tried and failed to summon some of his old authority. "This has gone far enough. This is a private family matter. You're making a public spectacle of our family name. Attempted murder is not a private family matter." "Michael," I said calmly, my voice echoing slightly in the marble-floored lobby. "It's a felony. Several felonies, in fact." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "That's a gross, hysterical exaggeration. I was managing your finances and your medication because you were unwell and becoming a danger to yourself. Stop, I said, and my voice, though quiet, cut through his pathetic excuses like a diamond blade through glass. Just stop. It's over. I have the recordings, Michael. I've heard you and Tiffany discussing my final decline. I've heard you planning to use Brenda's manufactured reports to have me declared incompetent so you could get your hands on the rest of the money. There are no more lies to hide behind. The structure is condemned. His face went pale. He finally truly understood that I knew everything. What do you want? He asked, his voice cracking, pathetic. Is it about the money? You want the money back? The accounts are frozen. There's nothing left to give. I looked at this stranger wearing my son's face, and a great unexpected wave of sadness washed over me. It wasn't sadness for him, but for the son I thought I had, the son I had loved so dearly, who had apparently never existed at all. I want nothing from you, Michael. That's the great tragedy. That's what you never understood. I would have given you everything. Freely. With love. My support, my opportunities, my wealth eventually. All you had to do was wait. All you had to do was be the son I thought you were. Then why? He pleaded, his eyes filling with tears of self-pity. Why go through with this public humiliation? For revenge? It's beneath you, Mom. This is not revenge, I said, meeting his gaze, my own eyes dry. This is consequences. And it is protection. Not just for me. Dr. Albright had other wealthy, elderly patients. Your actions, your downfall have given those families a chance at justice. This needed to end. You needed to be stopped. He tried one last time, his voice dropping to that gentle, caring, manipulative tone he used when he handed me my nightly dose of poison. Mom, please. We're still family. I studied him for a long, silent moment, seeing him with absolute, painful clarity for the first time in years. The hurt that had driven me for months was gone, replaced by a quiet, resolute, and final sense of closure. No, Michael, I said softly, but with the finality of a closing tomb. We're not. We are a plaintiff and a defendant. That is the relationship you chose for us. And now we will both see it through to the end. 1 year to the day after that disastrous, life-altering birthday party, I stood on the wide, welcoming steps of my former home. The harsh Colorado winter sun glinted off a newly installed, elegant bronze plaque that read, "The Vance Foundation for Aspiring Architects." The transformation was not just complete, it was a resurrection. The house was no longer a place of betrayal, a gilded cage of fear and suspicion. It was now a vibrant place of hope, creation, and future possibilities. Maria stood proudly beside me, no longer in the quiet uniform of a housekeeper, but in a smart professional suit as the Foundation's new and incredibly efficient administrative director. Behind us, like a vibrant garden of promise, stood the first cohort of 20 scholarship students, their young faces bright with talent and ambition. A reporter from Architectural Digest, a woman I had known for years, called out from the small, assembled crowd, "Mrs. Vance, Eleanor, how does it feel to see your home, your life's work, transformed this way?" I stepped up to the simple microphone that had been set up, feeling a slight familiar tremor in my right hand, a permanent unwelcome souvenir from my son's pharmaceutical interventions. I gripped the lectern for a moment to steady myself. Architecture, I began, my voice clear and steady, carrying over the quiet crowd, is always about transformation. It is about turning a vision into a structure, an idea into a space where lives can unfold. This building has been a home and it has been a battleground. Now it has reached its final and most important form, a legacy for the future. The legal proceedings had, in the end, concluded more swiftly than anyone anticipated. With Tiffany's detailed testimony, the mountain of evidence we had collected was simply overwhelming. Michael was sentenced to 8 years in a medium-security federal prison. Tiffany, for her cooperation, received 3. Dr. Albright, in a plea deal that involved him exposing a wider network of medical fraud and kickback schemes, was sentenced to 6 years and the permanent public revocation of his medical license. His information, Sarah Jenkins later told me, had led to 3 other suspicious deaths of wealthy, elderly patients being reopened as homicide investigations. Justice, it turned out, was a structure that could be built piece by painful, meticulous piece, and sometimes its foundation could support more than just one life. Later that year, I did something I wasn't sure I had the emotional or physical strength for. I went to visit Michael in prison. The visiting room was a sterile beige box, designed to numb the senses. He had aged a decade in a year. The expensive tailored suits were gone, replaced by a drab, khaki prison uniform that hung loosely on his thin frame. The arrogance, the defining feature of his personality, had been completely extinguished, replaced by a weary, hollow resignation. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice flat, not bothering to meet my eyes. "I came because I need to understand, Michael. Not to forgive. There is no forgiveness for what you did. But to understand. What makes a person, a son, decide that their own mother's life is worth less than their impatience for an inheritance?" He was silent for a long, long time, staring at his hands clasped on the metal table between us. Finally he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "You were always Eleanor Vance," he said. "The legend. The icon. You designed buildings that touched the sky. I sold high-end real estate. You never needed anyone or anything. You were a monument made of granite and steel." He finally looked up at me, and for a fleeting, heartbreaking instant, I saw a flicker of the lost little boy he used to be. "After Dad died, and then when Aunt Carol died so suddenly, you finally seemed breakable, human. And for the first time in my entire life, it felt like I had some power in our relationship. Started so small. Just helping you with your new iPad. Then managing your online banking. Felt good. To be needed by you. To be the strong one." "And Tiffany?" I asked quietly, my voice neutral. He gave a hollow, mirthless laugh. "Tiffany saw an opportunity. I saw a chance to finally be in control of something, to be the man of the family. She just showed me a faster, more efficient way to get there. She made it feel like a business plan, a strategic acquisition, not what it was." He couldn't bring himself to say the word. "Murder." I listened, not as a mother mourning her son, but as an architect examining a fatal, irreparable structural flaw in a condemned building. The foundation of our relationship hadn't been built on love, but on a toxic, unstable mixture of my success and his deep-seated resentment. It was always inevitably destined to collapse. I stood up from the hard plastic chair. "Goodbye, Michael." I left the prison that day and I never looked back. I didn't feel anger anymore, or even a profound sadness. I just felt done. The project was over. Some buildings are so fundamentally damaged, they can't be salvaged or remodeled. You can only study the ruins to learn why they fell, cordon off the area for safety, and then walk away and build something new, something stronger on solid ground. And that's exactly what I was going to do. 2 years to the day after I sat in my own home and overheard my life being appraised like a piece of property, I stood on the wide cedar terrace of my new home. It was a stunning modern structure of glass and steel, nestled by a serene lake just outside Denver. A house I had designed entirely for myself by myself. It wasn't a fortress or a monument to my ego. It was a sanctuary. It was a space designed for the woman I was now, not the woman I had been. It had wide doorways to accommodate any future mobility issues, gentle, sweeping ramps instead of stairs, and workspaces with specialized lighting that were perfectly adapted to the permanent, slight tremor in my right hand. It was a house that acknowledged vulnerability without sacrificing beauty, elegance, or strength. The terrace was filled with the warm, cheerful chatter of my new family. A family not of blood, but one that had been forged in the crucible of loyalty, crisis, and shared purpose. David was there, standing by the glass railing, his partnership having evolved into a deep, comfortable, and loving companionship that was the bedrock of my new life. Maria and her wonderful daughter, who had just been promoted to education director at the foundation, were laughing with Jack Riley, who had left the private investigation business to become the foundation's full-time head of security and risk management. Sarah Jenkins, now a respected federal judge, was there with her husband and children. And most importantly to me, the first graduating class of Vance scholars, the vibrant, talented, and fiercely ambitious young architects who were my true living legacy, were celebrating their success and their bright futures. My recovery, Dr. Peterson had informed me, had plateaued. The physical effects of the prolonged poisoning, the tremor in my hand, the occasional frustrating cognitive lapses where a word would simply vanish from my mind, the reduced stamina that required me to carefully manage my energy, were permanent. They were scars that would never fully fade. But they no longer defined me. They were simply part of my new revised blueprint. Howard Carrington, the esteemed CEO of the Carrington Group and now a dear friend, raised his glass of champagne. To Eleanor, he said, his voice booming with genuine affection, and to the groundbreaking of Phase 2 of the Aspen Project, a project that is already transforming the very fabric of our city. As applause filled the crisp evening air, I felt a simple, clean, and profound pride. It was a pride in work well conceived, in a battle hard won, and in a life meticulously rebuilt. Later, after most of the guests had departed, David came and stood beside me as we watched the moonlight dance on the dark, still water of the lake. I received a letter from Michael yesterday, I said quietly. He didn't say anything, just placed his warm hand over mine. His first in 18 months. He wanted to inform me that he's eligible for parole consideration next year. He says he's found religion, completed multiple rehabilitation programs, and has written a memoir about the corrosive effects of toxic ambition. Are you going to respond? David asked, his voice gentle. I shook my head, a small sad smile touching my lips. There's nothing left to say. You can't remodel a ruin. You can only leave it to the elements. Any regrets? He asked after a long, comfortable silence. I considered the question seriously, looking out at the life I had built from the ashes of my old one. Only that I didn't make that call to you 20 years sooner, I answered honestly. I lost years to a quiet, creeping fear and a sad inertia long before Michael ever handed me those first poisoned pills. He squeezed my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. The tremor in my hand is a constant, physical reminder of the life I almost lost, of the woman I almost allowed myself to become. But the glittering skyline of Denver in the distance, where my old proud buildings stand beside the new, hopeful ones rising from the Aspen Project, is a testament to the life I chose to design and build instead. Thank you all for listening to my story. It's never ever too late to tear down an old flawed blueprint and design a new stronger beginning for yourself. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep it forced you to find a strength you never knew you had? Or have you witnessed the devastating, hidden effects of financial or emotional abuse within a family? Please share your story, your thoughts, or your words of support in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your stories create a powerful community that reminds us we are never truly alone. If this story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe for more. Until next time, be safe, be strong, and keep building your best life one day at a time.